Hello, everybody, and welcome to None the Lesser. I am your host, Cody Buchanan. Today, we talk with a horror author about his debut from 2019 and his upcoming release set for late October. From staying productive during a pandemic to his past in the Mormon Church, we cover it all. So let's jump right into this chat with my friend, Joseph Hood. All right, Joseph, I'm excited to have you on here and get into this interview. Why don't we have you start off by introducing yourself and telling everybody what it is you do as a creator and who you are as the human you are being.
Well, I am a human being. My name is Joseph Hood. I am an indie author out of Salt Lake City. I just released my debut horror novel, My Friend Nick, in October of last year. I have lived in a couple different states. I've lived in Connecticut, like I said, Wyoming, Arizona. I worked in Yellowstone and Arizona for the National Park Service. As far as writing goes, I've been writing for about as long as I can remember. I really can't come up with a date. It feels like 20 plus years. The earliest thing I remember writing was I was sitting in the back seat of my dad's car. I was little. We were headed to Oregon, and I had a notepad with me, and I had seen this trailer for, was it called Dragonheart, I think? It came out in the 90s. I was basically writing what happened in the trailer down as if it was like my own story, and I was making these tiny little changes, and my sister asked what it was. I was embarrassed to tell her. But
you took all the credit nonetheless.
Yeah, I took all the credit there, in the car, the back seat of my, car, headed to Oregon with my siblings and on our family trip. And yeah, I just remember doing that and just loving it. I like to draw scary things. I like to draw things like that, dragons and dinosaurs and stuff when I was little. I drew a lot when I was little. That was kind of my first artistic endeavor. And then I got into music when I was a teenager, playing guitar and bass, which I still do a few times a year, but writing is so time consuming that I can't do it as much as I would like, and I can certainly say that. But I myself was born in India. I was raised in the U.S. I was adopted when I was little, when I was very little. Again, I live with my wife and two kids, and yeah, that's it. I went to the University of Utah, and that's me. I usually go by Joe. That's the other thing is Joseph is my author name, but most people do call me Joe.
Very good. Well, good to have you on here, Joe, and I'm excited to get into this. You will have to bear with me. I'm in the middle of nowhere, so if our connection breaks up, then you know why.
Yeah, I've lived out in the middle of nowhere before.
Okay. And was that in Utah?
Yeah, in Utah. I lived in Yellowstone National Park. I worked there when I was 19. And then I did the same in Arizona. In a camp spot one summer for 2 months. And yeah, I've spent a lot of my time. There's a lot of country here.
Yeah, I've never been. What's it like out there?
It's a lot more mountainous, at least up north, and then down south you have like Zion and Bryce and all like the Red Rock formation cliffs and stuff. And it's a very geologically, environmentally diverse state.
And you said you worked at Yellowstone?
Yeah, I did that when I was 19 as a kind of a cabin room attendant.
And what was that like?
It was awesome, honestly. It was probably one of the best times of my entire life. Just the experiences of being way out there. Man, lightning hit a tree in between our dorms one night and blew a piece off of the tree, and it hit this window, and it broke the window and it set off smoke alarms. Oh, it was so loud too. We were in one of the dorms and we didn't know what it was. It set off all the alarms, and a bunch of cars went off, and it was crazy.
Yeah, that's no joke. I had a lightning bolt hit a flagpole like 20 feet from me, and it was just the loudest thing ever.
It brings you to your knees, you know. We honestly thought it was maybe a gun. Like we just did not know. We thought it sounded so close, and it really was. It sounded like an explosion or something, you know, and I guess the way it was
Yeah.
from the sky.
Yeah, if you're like out in the open when it happens, it's like the air turns like staticky and it's just weird.
Yeah, totally. After we were way up there, we worked at Canyon. If you've ever been to Yellowstone, we worked at the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. It's by the big waterfall, and so you're up there high. And
Yeah.
there was all this storm, and we felt so close too to like the clouds of the storm. And then that happened, and we didn't know for a second, and then we ran out, and it was like, oh my gosh, I think it was lightning. And oh, I remember people running out of their rooms and the look on their faces. You never forget that stuff. I remember one night going out and a male bison, I didn't see him. It was dark and he was like probably 15 feet from me, but they're huge. They're bigger
Yeah.
than a small van, and it was just so terrifying.
And of course, they're like terribly aggressive, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're really aggressive, especially during the mating season. They make this deep growl, this territorial growl, and it kind of growled at me.
The universal statement of just stay the fuck away from me.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Back the fuck off. One time we were up there for like 3 months that time, almost, and my girlfriend at the time, her parents came to they visited us, and we went camping, took a few days off, and we were in a camping spot one time, and these bison roamed in, and you can't just tell them to leave. Like couple dozen bison, they don't do that either, really, if they can prevent it. And they started to kind of like battle in the streets there in between the cars. So everybody ran into their vehicles, and it was terrifying watching them just slide around in the dirt and kind of knock each other down. Not really completely over, but
Yeah, apparently moose are like just as bad and territorial and will just stroll through wherever the hell they want.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with Park City. I lived up in Park City in that area for many years, and we had moose, and they're fucking huge and fucking dangerous and scary. They're huge animals, and they're pissed off.
Oh yeah, that's just their natural existence is just being pissed off with the world.
You get in between one and its baby, and it'll fucking kill you, you know?
You don't even have to get between them and their baby. You just got to be nearby.
Yeah, yeah. You just have to fucking look at them, and they'll kill you.
Yeah, we haven't camped in moose territory, not necessarily for avoiding it, but also for avoiding it.
Well, and I guess that's, another thing while we're talking about it. I'm lucky enough, my dad owns property in southern Utah. My family owns property. He kind of inherited it. It's a long story, family stuff.
I mean, if you're comfortable talking about it, we can get into that.
So the Mormon Church in Utah, which is very big, owned land in southern Utah. It was called Orderville because they kind of had their own, like, I believe, order there, their own. I know that they got in some trouble. I don't want to quite say one because I know that's kind of controversial. I guess people can look it up if they're listening to this. But my dad's family owned dairy land off of there, and he inherited some, and it's just out there in the middle of nowhere. And we still own it. We don't, all that's been disbanded. This was over 100 years ago too. This was in like the late 1800s, where the origins of Orderville. Now, things are completely different. But we own property down there, and I've spent a lot of time down there. There's bear and bobcats and deer, but you don't see a lot of them. They hide in the wilderness, I guess.
So somehow he inherited that land, though.
Yeah, his grandparents were part of, I guess, the family, and they provided dairy to the Ordervillians, I guess you could say. And no, it's an interesting. I wish I knew, factually. I don't like to say things that are not true, but yeah, the Mormon Church created kind of an order, kind of a little town down there, and they did that in many places. But this one was called Orderville, and they own some dairy, land that
Yeah.
provided the town. And here, 150 plus years later, it has been divided amongst many hundreds or thousands of people, and we own a few acres. So,
Yeah, the Mormon culture is something I don't really know much about, but it's always been interesting to me. Does how does that impact your life?
I did grow up Mormon. I'll tell you this. I was named after Joseph Smith, and to anybody who was raised Mormon, that's a big thing because he started the church. Joseph Smith had the, quote unquote, divine vision back in the late 1800s, I believe, um, that started the church more or less, and that's interesting to me. My parents are LDS. I am not. So I grew up LDS. I left the church when I was about, I don't know, 15, maybe 14 even.
It's something that I'd like to believe I can imagine just based on what I have seen in the media and pop culture or whatever, but it's something that I also feel like I probably can't imagine at all.
Yeah, you probably can't. I don't want to say too much. Again, I don't know if you want to get political. I am not Mormon. I am not religious.
Yeah, I mean, as political as you want to get, that's fine with me. It's really up to whoever I'm talking to.
I like to talk, and I'm just trying to cover my bases here.
Yeah.
I am not religious. I do find them very, I don't know, fundamentalist, radical in uh, to many extents. They've changed, though. The church it's evolved. I think all churches evolve, all political organizations evolve, and I don't know. I can't say I admire anybody for that. I just think it happens, and I do think that it's good. It helps people. Sometimes I wish it would happen faster, although I am not anti-religious. I studied anthropology in school, and some of my favorite studies were religious studies. My world religions class, who was taught by a former Buddhist Sri Lankan, and I loved that class. I really, really did. I learned so much about Hinduism and Jainism. He taught mostly Eastern faiths, but it was really interesting.
Yeah, Buddhism has always been one that interests me, and I've read a lot of books on it, and I think there's a lot of takeaway from it, whether you're religious or not.
Yeah, I am fascinated in Buddhism. I joke around sometimes and tell people that I'm a born again Jedi. Um, I find specifically, I believe it's pronounced Theravada Buddhism to be fascinating. Uh, I don't know. There's not a lot of rules associated with it. There's concepts, there's core concepts, and that helps me live a better life. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, other than that, I cannot, I'm not religious.
Yeah, I mean, with so many options, it's just too hard to pick sometimes.
Yeah, that's my problem. Maybe I'm just waiting for the right option. I'm just waiting for the right one to come along. No, I don't know. I'm happy, and I think
Yeah.
that's what's important. I think that, and that's why I say I'm not anti-religious, is I think that if you're happy and you're not, my favorite saying, in regards to that is if you can do no good, do no harm. You know?
Yeah, as long as you're happy and not harming anyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's get into who you are as an author, a creator, and how you're doing right now with everything going on in this wild world we find ourselves in. What's the impact of this pandemic and everything else going on? How is that impacting your work and your productivity?
I I'll be honest, and I'm sure pretty much most honest people would tell you to some degree I haven't. I have had to remind myself to keep a schedule, to keep going, honestly. Um, and making that time and fulfilling that promise or obligation to myself. Somebody was talking to me the other day, and they said, if you only write 500 words a day, you could easily write a novel in a year. And right now is extremely
Yeah.
hard. And we're not all writing novels. Some of us are just getting into it. And so worrying right now about writing 1,500 words a day is I had to cut, well, that's right there. I was working 5 days a week on this current project, which we can talk about. And when this all went down, I realized I need to keep writing to really stay sane.
Yeah.
But I can't write 5 days a week. We've got two kids living here. I've got two stepsons who depend on me, and my wife and me. And I've got to manage my life, but I need some way to express I don't know, my frustration, my confusion, my anger, the pain. I think we're all
Yeah.
going through right now. The months ago, I read an article, and the title of it was something like the what you are experiencing right now, the emotion you are experiencing right now is grief. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And then I thought about it for a second. I was like, no, that kind of sums it up. I feel
Yeah.
like so many things, I was thinking about that the other day. When are things going to be normal again? Like normal, like they were in December on Christmas Day. And I don't know. And I mean, let's look at it as a whole. Let's take however you want to look at that. Just paint a picture of it quickly in your head or in my head, in anybody's mind. When are all those things going to be that way again?
Yeah. And the longer it goes on, it just feels like, this Christmas, these holidays, like, are they going to be back to normal? And I don't see it, especially with how many people just aren't taking it serious and, doing whatever they want, basically.
And and Americans themselves and their attitudes about exactly that, because we are very careful. I'm close to my family right now when we're in close contact, but that doesn't mean physically. I
Right.
have, potentially, I think many, we don't know what these pre-existing conditions are in many cases, and I'm not willing to risk that, I guess is the
Yeah.
bottom line. Is,
Yeah.
I could talk all about this and that, but ultimately I'm just not willing to take the risk. We don't
No.
understand this well enough right now, and I think what we do understand is terrifying.
Yeah. I agree. And I mean, like right in the beginning, my wife, she's always worked from home, and we have a daughter, and she stays home, watches her, and works. And I was working from home, and then I started to go back to the office, and it was like reintegrating back into society after the initial lockdowns was kind of strange. My problem is not so much the virus as we know it in the immediate time, but like what happens down the road. Is it chronic? Do certain symptoms come back? Do certain symptoms show their face for the first time and they're way worse than what we already know? And that stuff definitely freaks me out. But being in a rural setting definitely reduces my fear personally of it. I do think it's something to be feared for sure.
I think it's interesting that you say that, because I feel like we're in slightly reverse situations. We both work from home, but we're in the middle of a dense, one of the most quickly growing places in the country. Or at least until a few months ago. Now things have kind of come to a halt
Right.
ish, but so we don't have to go a lot of places, but when you do, that and I'm always weird about quoting numbers. There's at least there's a million people in the valley, and that's a fact. And
It's a lot of people to have together at once.
yeah, and thousands of people at these rallies, which I fully support, but it worries you, you know.
Yeah. I do not blame them one bit for their rallying or for their anger. I think it's completely justified. I do worry about the potential outcome for them and everyone around them after being exposed to each other for that time.
Yeah, and it's terrifying.
Absolutely. Now let's get into you as an author. Obviously, we talked about your debut, My Friend Nick, that came out in October of 2019, and your work in progress, which is The Bride of Warren, which is set to come out in October of this year.
Yeah, that is I'm looking title. I'm scheduling that one for an October 30th release or around then, about that week.
And based on the teaser and everything we've seen so far, it indicates that we are following the same horror genre as My Friend Nick. Is that correct?
Yeah, in some cases, I have, I've kind of thought about this one, and I've ultimately labeled it a suspense thriller with horror elements. I think says it better. I feel like there's less drama in this one. It's a little more fast paced. It is a shorter book. I wouldn't be surprised if some people sit down and read it in a day. If that's if they get into it, hopefully. That's the first thing I got to worry about. But it is, with the word count wise, it's less, and that kind of just happens with stories. I think I don't know. I've stretched it kind of.
But they're done when they're done.
Yeah, they're done when they're done.
And the way I typically operate is I'll read like a big book, longer read, and then I'll break it up with some smaller reads, shorter stories, or even just some excerpts out of some anthologies, just to loosen things up a little before the next big read. So it'll cater to that for me, at least.
Yeah, I compare a lot of my stuff because I'm influenced by a lot of movies. I love film. I love watching movies. I could talk about movies all day. And I feel that way with movies. It's easy to make a movie too long or too short. Sometimes it doesn't take a lot to do that either way. It's like, oh, they should have just added this and this and it would have been perfect. Or they should have taken that and maybe removed it. And sometimes I don't know. I don't know why people do that. Maybe I think people think longer movies are better, longer books are better, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even like for me, I have not released anything, but I've got work in progresses like coming out my ears, and they're of all different lengths, and it's just a matter of like, which one do I finish first? Because it doesn't matter what length it is. There's an audience that any length of book will cater to. So, I wouldn't worry about that too much necessarily.
Yeah, and that is kind of what it comes down to. You just find what people are gonna want and what is going to be most effective for the audience that is really gonna buy what you're selling, and to find that zone that is most effective.
Right. Now, what inspires you to write what you do?
Oh man, a lot of stuff I've read, movies. What drives me, I guess, I don't know if that changes the subject. It's a way for me to get out some of the thoughts and the emotions that I have about myself, about humanity, about the world, about my thoughts, and it allows me to explore them freely and sometimes go places truly that, and you've read the book, are terrifying, but force me and hopefully my readers to ask questions about what I'm presenting them with. And one rule I have for my books is I always go too far. And when I say that, I mean, I will always find things that I'm like, oh no, you shouldn't do that. And then I start to think about it and I'm like, no, if it makes sense, do it,
Yeah.
Do it, for even if it's hard for you, because that's the point, is to learn and to try and come back to this. Maybe, hopefully, I always hope that people will read my books. I know that a lot of people don't do that, but I write them in that manner as kind of, philosophical examinations, character studies. And a lot of the stuff, again, that I have thought about, my life experiences, certainly the things I see out in the world, the personal struggles I've dealt with, I've seen others deal with or not deal with, truly, know.
Yeah, and I think that's where we as humans have always kind of fallen into our storytelling techniques, whether it be to share our experience in the literal sense of this is what I experienced in my life and here's exactly how it happened, or if it's some extreme take on it where we say this fictional story of this group, this family, whoever's being affected by this thing, it's like a extreme take on something that we may have actually experienced ourselves. And, as a consumer of it, we look at that and say, okay, either this is interesting to me, something that's of a completely different world and life than mine, or we say this is something I relate to greatly because I've been through the same thing.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with everything you said. I think that is why we do it. We do it to convey information about our experiences on this earth and
Yep.
the interactions we have with not only each other, but every other living and non-living thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's talk about productivity because following you on Instagram, you are very clearly stern believer in setting your deadline and sticking to it. But we all hit those creative ruts. So when you hit your own creative rut, how do you make sure to stay to that deadline still and make sure that you're still producing something that's quality, or accepting that sometimes maybe you aren't going to produce something that's quality and stick to it anyways?
I think sometimes, I guess there's no other way to say it. Sometimes you have to be willing to write shit. That I
Yeah,
think
that's
sums
true.
it up. And I think that you either have to you either sit around and go, "Oh shit, I'm gonna write shit," or you just say, "Fuck it, I'm gonna write shit today." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think when you practice that long enough, you can eventually build up to the stronger moments in your stories and hopefully get through them. And I don't know. And sometimes you look back on those things and sometimes they're worse than you thought they were, but sometimes they are better, or there's just being able just sitting down and writing gives you something to work with, even if you do have to scrap 95% of it. And so I would just say, consistency regardless of quality, honestly. And that's hard. It's very difficult. I think it's you can tell people that, but they're not necessarily, I don't necessarily do it all the time. But then you start to fall behind, 5 or 6 or 7,000 words, and it's like, well, shit, do I just again kind of suck it up? And I don't know. It takes a lot of, I think, humility. Drafts too, and our drafts, I think, for at least novels, and you're gonna have just some utter garbage in there and stuff that needs to be changed, no matter how good your drafts
Yeah.
are. And I feel like mine have gotten better, but I still go back and I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Like, none of this is gonna work together. But again, I don't know. It is just the process of consistency and believing, I guess, that the end product will be hopefully worth it.
Worthy of publishing.
Uh-huh. Maybe they all aren't. I know I've got some that I won't talk about, but and perhaps we all do, but
Do you find yourself to be someone that goes back when you're done with the whole project and does some rereading and editing, or do you do like a chapter or a paragraph? How does that work for you?
used to, but I will not anymore. I honestly actually just recently, it's funny that you say that. I reached and I won't say, too much about it, but I am about halfway or further actually with this novel. And I decided to do that, and I found myself doing it just, it wasn't a bad thing. I was able to see some things in the story that maybe needed tweaking and this and that, but ultimately it did kind of slow me down. It slowed down a lot of momentum, and it was hard to pick up and want to continue writing the last half of the story. Whereas I didn't do that with my friend Nick, and there was a lot of editing
Mm-hmm.
after. But I don't know. I think in the future I will probably, I don't know, just write it to the end like I did with my friend Nick and hope for the best, because I do find that it generally, I think at best, again, you can make some observations about the story, you can tweak things a little, but what is most important is doing that and not losing the motivation is to do it or to do it at all, which I think a lot of people do because they go back so much that they think their stuff is just utter garbage.
Yeah, I feel like as a new writer, I often run into that where I do go back and read what I've just written and I know what I want to do in the next scene, but I'm just like, I can't go any further because I'm just like ashamed of how terrible the product is that I just put out on that paper. And there's a lot of people that I think struggle with that, especially earlier on writers. And there's an app out there called the Most Dangerous Writing app, and it literally deletes everything that you have just written if you pause for more than 5 seconds. So it's like a you got to keep going and you can't look back kind of app. And I think, for some people that really works, but that's a lot of pressure knowing that you could have something really good behind you and just ruin it all.
That's cool, actually. That's a good tool for I used to do NaNoWriMo for that reason because if I didn't keep typing the whatever 16 plus 100 words, 1600 words, around there that you have to write a day. I don't know if you're familiar with NaNoWriMo. Um, you write a 50,000 word novel in a month.
I've heard of NaNoWriMo, but I've never participated.
New and practice writers do it. I did for many years. I haven't been able to since I've been in school or working on these indie novels. Writing a 50,000 word novel in a month or in 30 days teaches you a lot.
Yeah.
And it really certainly, the few times I did it, taught me a lot. And I know that they have a shorter one in June, I want to say, this month, maybe Camp Nano. And I think that that's 30,000 words is their goal. And you can set it higher, but it is really good. Just practice getting words on the page.
Yeah, I should probably participate in something like that sometime. But you mentioned you were working on novels. So do you have many work in progress pieces right now, or where are you sitting?
I only ever work, I learned a few years ago that just had to work on one. I have over the years worked on many and finished a few that have not been published. I would like to go and refine them because they're old enough that I feel like my writing has improved enough that I would want to again improve upon them. Um, but right now, I will only work on one thing. I always try and plan, 6 months, 7, 8 months ahead. I do know what I'm going to do next year. I'm planning a untitled sci-fi horror, and I've got some other things possibly planned for afterwards. I was actually going to do that one this year, and some things changed, and I feel like this is a proper story for this year and a proper leap off of the ideas and concepts and world building I did in My Friend Nick. So
Yeah, so My Friend Nick, is that the town that it's set in? Is it based off any town that you know personally, or is it something you kind of imagined from the ground up, just picturing like the American rural town?
it is based on an area. I debate whether or not I will say names here. There are a lot of rural areas around Utah. Utah is just littered with these tiny little towns, of a couple
Yeah.
hundred people. And so it was based on one of those. There are several on the way down to my cabin in southern Utah. I mean, just countless ones I could never, you know, it's a 6 hour drive down there and you just see them everywhere. And some of them, it's like, man, does anybody even live here? But it was just being inspired by seeing those and throughout the years and briefly living in one. They have a creepiness to them. They have an eeriness.
Yeah, I've almost exclusively lived in those small rural towns, and the town that My Friend Nick is set in is like spot on, like living, breathing one of those towns where everyone knows everyone and everyone knows everyone's business in the town's history. Like I grew up in Holly, Michigan, and it had there's a hotel there, and everyone knows that that hotel is haunted, and it's just like brought me back to those days.
Yeah, and there's some of that stuff that goes down in southern Utah at my ranch. There were, when I was little, rumors about the caves in the hills with Native American jewelry and like an artwork and stuff, and or little down there, little ghost towns. The set of Gunsmoke is down there. One of them is down there. One of the sets. Yeah, it's just cool. It's just a cool kind of, again, sort of creepy. Has sort of an aged. I don't know. I don't know how to word that. You know.
Yeah, I definitely appreciated that about Dalton, the town in My Friend Nick, because it felt like a very realistic representation of that small town, and it was obvious that the writer yourself had experienced something similar, and it definitely brought me back to my time in a less eventful small town. But what I really enjoyed about My Friend Nick was your ability to get into your characters and truly tell the reader how they're feeling, or show them how they're feeling, rather. And I guess, would you say that your characters are based off of people you know, or parts of yourself, or are they completely some people that you imagined up for this story?
I think it's a little of column A and B, and definitely even a little of C. You know, it's a lot of me. It's a lot of the people I know. It's a lot of guesses. I am not a 34-year-old woman with a little girl named Emily, and so I, so I had to take some, I had to take some shots in the dark. As far as Debbie's experience, truly, I think, and first novels are such. I don't know what I will think, in 10 or 20 years looking back on that, but it was certainly a triumph for me as a person, and a person who has dealt with many of the same things that she has. Again, not the things that I mentioned, not having the name Debbie, or I do not have children of my own, but experiencing trauma from loss, experiencing trauma from I no longer drink, but I used to drink a lot, in my 20s. I think many people do, to escape what was going on in the world around me, what was going on inside of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And things that had happened to me when I was younger, I don't know. I would say I learned the hard way, but I learned and relearned different things. And I wanted to capture that. I wanted to capture that, the complexity of that experience somehow. And what was funny is, in the first draft, she was intended to be a throwaway character. And when I went back the second time, I realized that I couldn't tell the story the way I thought I could, which was mostly through the eyes of Emily, who was a 7-year-old girl, because people don't want to read the thoughts of a 7-year-old girl for 300 pages, And
Yeah,
I had
it's
to,
just on repeat.
yeah, I had to humanize her a little bit more and give them something that maybe they could relate to. And I don't know, I guess I was just it was an open book experience for me, and I tried to give as much as I could. And that has been one very positive feedback of the book, is that just people has loved her character.
Yeah, and with good reason. I mean, she was a very easy character to feel engaged with and feel the pain and struggle that she dealt with, and even find a lot of levels to relate with her on. And I think that's kind of where my review comes in, where it's like the characters are endearing and you are rooting for them, but at the same time some of them can be kind of frustrating to deal with, but that's not for them being unrealistic or bad characters. It's not like a movie where they are going into a room and you're like, why would you go into that room? It's all about how they know the flaws that are in them and they need to fix them. And as a reader, you're just saying, please fix yourself so you can do better. It takes the time that it takes, because it's very much a struggle, as it would be for any person facing what they face.
Yeah, it's with all the characters, it was trying to humanize them a little, trying to although I said that earlier. I joked around when I was writing it. I said, well, there's something in there for everybody, you know.
Yeah,
You would have had to have been Nick not to find anything, even one thing in the book, absolutely revolting,
yeah, yeah.
and, and horrifying. At least one thing. Um,
Right, right.
I do this pretty often with like movies and other books too, where I don't read the description or watch the trailer or watch people's reviews. I often try to go into books and movies and even video games, things like that, not knowing what to expect, because it 100% of the time always makes it more surprising, makes it more enjoyable even most of the time too. Being able to, not know exactly what I'm supposed to be scared of. Like in your book, I knew there was something to be afraid of. I didn't know if it was a monster in physical form or some other form, but I just knew that there's something in this book that I'm supposed to be scared of, and it made it more scary not knowing what that was. And so I totally recommend anyone that reads My Friend Nick after this to go into it not knowing what to expect. Again, we're not spoiling much of anything in this discussion we're having. And I think that if people do pick it up and they do so without reading the description, without reading the reviews or anything like that, you're not going to have that initial sway in your mind of how to feel about the book, what to expect. You're basically thrown into the setting as the author, Joseph, would intend you to be. But, I do want to talk about your characters, one in particular, Debbie, who seems to be a lot of people's favorite. But there's a motif that goes on with her, and that's the circus going on in her head. And I love that description of everything she's experiencing and basically just the downward spiral of her character. And that circus motif that keeps coming up is just so perfectly describing exactly how she's feeling internally, despite having to present herself as feeling put together. And there's a particular excerpt that I want to read, and it's this one right here that I highlighted in my ebook version. I already have the physical version as well, but I like to be able to highlight, and I don't like doing that in my physical copies. The excerpt is, quote, "Peace was only achieved by learning to let go and coming to the realization that you never really had ownership at all of the things you love. Everything you cherished was on loan until destiny waved a product recall in your face and you had to say goodbye forever." And it's a end quote, sorry. And it's a line that really jumped out to me for a few reasons. One, it's just really pointed. It's not necessarily like an overbearing string of lines by any means, but it is kind of dark and deep and nihilistic. A reminder that the things you love, no matter how much you cherish them, they are temporary, and that could be whether they leave you early or you leave them early. And I think when you read something like that in a book, you can almost sense like the author was experiencing something at that time that influenced that writing style. Could you remember that time? And was there anything you were going through that made you write that?
Yeah, I really do. And it was just that thought. It was that realization, which is horrifying. And I think I remember hearing that in my 20s, to let go of these things, let go of some of the things that happened in my past. And I fought with that. And it was until now, I'm turning 34 this summer, until the last few years, I've really had to look at it and ask myself, how many more years am I going to carry this around with me like this? Exactly like it is packaged up like I have for a decade or more. And it's like, and then maybe I can't take all of it off my shoulders, but like, hell, man, and I think it was, I don't know, I do absolutely remember that. And like you said, it doesn't bring you much peace.
For me, it almost feels like giving up on control is when you find out what peace really is. And that's kind of that nihilistic approach where it's just accepting that you didn't have control and you can be at peace knowing that.
Yeah.
And the second excerpt starts with, quote, "All of us, everyone, even mommy and daddy, we're the real werewolves, the witches and vampires. We just have to keep it hidden so we can keep feeding off each other. It's the only way to survive. The only difference is what makes you turn. Just like in fairy tales, some monsters are born, others are created. But in the end, they're the exact same thing." And for me, end quote, sorry. And for me, that line jumped out because it's simple and pointed, and it's saying what it means to say. But it's so fitting for the story because you're dealing with childhood fears and storytelling and folktale kind of spooky stuff, maybe, possibly. But the things that make you fear the dark. In this book, you can walk away afraid of the dark, but you also walk away, knowing that the real monsters in this world are the people. The people make the dark scary. Yeah, there's the animals and beasts that would love to feed off of you in the dark, but in the end, you can walk away from some noise in the woods knowing it was an animal, and that's fine. But if you knew it was a person, that'd be 10 times scarier. And I think, that line definitely stood out to me because it fits the story so well. And it makes me wonder once again, what was the author thinking at that time?
I that is awesome that you picked that one. In some ways, I guess I constructed the novel around that dialogue. I hope I'm not ruining The Empire Strikes Back for anybody, but that was like my "I am your father" dialogue in that novel. It was the "some monsters are born." I actually was going to use that as a tagline for the book, and I think may have early on, and decided I didn't want anything like you said. I wanted people to go in blind, and I didn't want to provide them with something that built up this premonition of what is he referring to. I didn't want them to know. All I wanted them to know was the title and perhaps look at the artwork on the cover and decide they were delving in. And I do. I love doing that with movies too and books. It's an exciting experience. But yeah, that was an idea. And it brings up an interesting point because I don't know, without ruining too much, the individual brings up that point. I don't know how much of that is true. How much of it do we see in the world around us, or are people trying to convince us is true so that they can perpetrate this circus of or I don't know, monsters and werewolves and vampires and beasts, feeding on each other and I guess this dog eat dog mentality. I don't know what they want, what they're used to. And when I wrote that book, I will say this, I wrote it to ask questions, not necessarily to answer them. And so I really don't.
Yeah.
I only know that it is powerful. At least it was powerful to me. It's a powerful idea and one that I continue to struggle with.
Yeah, and I think again, the reason it jumped out to me wasn't necessarily that it was this big crazy concept. It's not. It's very pointed and it's easy to understand. But I think in the story and in the dialogue that it is shared between the two people that are involved, it is very much like a coming of age moment where you come to realize through the character's eyes that not all monsters kill people, not all monsters physically harm people. Some monsters truly just live off the advantages of others, and that's something you can take from the book and kind of open your eyes to real life or whatever. It doesn't matter, but I think it just jumped out to me for that reason, where it was put in front of innocence in the story and turned the world a little more real and harmful, I guess.
Definitely. Yeah, it plays on that existential horror, I guess, that I was going for when I wrote it.
All right, so all that out of the way, what do you think is unique to your creative process?
Man, what do you think is unique to me? What do I do that I don't think like other people do? And
That or something that you think few people do?
I tend to see my novels almost, this is weird, I was thinking about this the other night, as like a sculpture inside of my head, this kind of like nebulous thing,
Yeah.
if that's weird enough for you.
Interesting. Is this like a sculpture that's still, or is it like alive with like a pulse and motion?
Mostly still, but very like large and I don't know, again, like nebulous, strangely shaped, but that I'm crafting it kind of by hands as I type. And areas need to be, tightened, some need to be, again, it's like this big, bizarre looking vase or something, and full of this, fucked up story in some cases. In most cases so far. And I constantly come back to that. What does this thing look like? What is off, what is uneven, and I tend to see it visually. I'm a visual learner.
Mhm.
And somewhere inside my head I have these weird shapeless things that are my stories in it. And yeah, it's quite, I don't know, I find it interesting. I've told other people that and they found it peculiar and interesting, so
Yeah, I don't have the unique approach to it in my head as you do. Mine is probably very similar to most people's, where I just imagine like movie scene or like cinema. Like when I have a story idea in my mind and I start typing it, I'm conveying it as the TV show that's playing in my head shows it. I would imagine my story as like a multiple season show, like Game of Thrones or whatever. And then that's kind of how I see the story as I type it.
yeah, cinema's influence on writing is fascinating. I feel like I am as much or in some ways more influenced by film. I watch so many movies, and actually even my friend Nick was influenced by a few different films heavily. Jaws and The Good Son, starring Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood. Even Alien, strangely, heavily influenced I don't know, without saying too much. Very much the pacing, again, I openly, I don't know if one of us have probably said it's kind of a slow burn. But so is Alien, You don't see the damn thing till an hour into the movie, and it comes out of nowhere, and that has stuck with me ever since I saw that when I was probably far too little, to actually be
Yeah, right.
when mom
Yeah.
and dad were asleep.
Yeah, I think that's what I love most about the movie Alien, is that it is very slow paced and engaging in the characters, and you get so invested in the characters that at some times you're still on edge and you don't remember why, and you're like, oh yeah, this is a horror movie and I'm supposed to be scared of something. I don't know what it is, but I know it's coming. Maybe you saw the trailer or the cover, or the name of the movie is Alien, so you know that it's supposed to be scary. And I felt the same way with my friend Nick, not knowing what to expect, but knowing that there's something to be feared. And I didn't know when it was going to rear its ugly face. And I read the book before my wife, and I kept mentioning to her as I was reading it, I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be scared of, but I know I'm anxious because I'm anticipating something. And I think that's definitely not something you find often in books. I mean, like Stephen King, you get it a lot. A lot of newer authors like to jump straight into the fast pace, here's all the action, and that's fine. I enjoy those too. But sometimes it's refreshing to have that more character driven plot that kind of keeps you on edge and then pulls the rug out from under you when it's too late.
I grew up liking faster paced stuff, but I don't know, I do love the slower paced stuff, even between Alien and Aliens. I prefer to watch Aliens, just because of all the action and whatnot, but Alien is certainly the better film in my opinion. And for that reason, they don't come out, in the first 20 minutes, and have to be taken down or, assaulted with machine guns and whatnot. and I don't know, in Alien, there's just that building fear
Yeah.
and sense of hopelessness and sense of oh, I don't know, you don't understand what you're dealing with either. And
Right.
Yeah, I mean, comparing your book to Alien to Aliens, like I said, Alien and your book are clearly character driven, where in Alien you have Ripley, and you're learning so much about this person and their strengths and weaknesses and their shortcomings, and you get so invested and you fear for losing them. And that's where those kinds of movies and those kinds of books really get the hooks in readers, where it's all about the character. With Aliens, it's very much plot driven, and it's straight into the action. There's so many characters you can hardly keep track of them, and it just doesn't really matter who lives or who dies because you don't know any of them well enough.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
But obviously the plot driven, action packed movies cater to a broader audience nowadays, but it really depends, what audience do you want? Do you want that audience, or do you want something a little more sophisticated?
I think that's true. Even this novel, I'm really enjoying writing this, but I don't know if it's catering to, or I wanted to change it up a little, at least, and this is a little faster paced, again, thriller suspense. And I do love it, but I will always, I don't know if prefer is the word, but I just gravitate to those character driven, slow burn.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that completely.
I appreciate the feedback on the book. Anything more, if there's anything you want to ask, again, that's more or less spoiler free.
Yeah, I was going to say, or ask rather, regarding both your novels, My Friend Nick and The Bride of Warren, was there ever any point where you felt like you might abandon those projects? Obviously, you made it through My Friend Nick, and you're nearing the end of Bride of Warren, but did you ever feel like maybe it wasn't meant to be?
Yeah, honestly, even both of them, I think sometimes I never thought that, God, the last week or two with this one and all that's going on, again, and going back and editing stuff, I should have just left for the end. Did really slow down and question whether or not it was worth it. I don't know if I'm me, and I, I probably would have picked it up sooner or later, but I don't want it to be later, I don't
Right.
necessarily need it to be now, but I also don't want to abandon it for any stretch of time completely. But yeah, my friend Nick, I think that artists too have a tendency, I certainly do, to push myself to like the breaking point
Yeah.
with projects. And as hard as it is, and sometimes I'm hard on myself for it, I have to remember that that is a learning process. And hopefully my friend Nick was a lot more, either because of its content or I don't know, first novel or what. It was a lot more hard on me mentally and emotionally. It was hard, Um,
Hmm.
and this, although I've reached a couple times where I'm like, oh my God, I'm able to stop and say, dude, you need to take in like a breath. That isn't, and
Yeah.
I've never acted in a movie. I've never or done anything like that. But I wonder if it's like that. Like your first role's supposed to kind of kick your ass. And you go
Yeah.
back and your second role, hell, I mean, it's not perfect, but it didn't quite kick your ass. You know?
Right. Right.
I mean, do it was hard, and it was one of the greatest accomplishments of my life because I've always dreamed of releasing a book. I can't honestly say I knew it was going to be a horror novel. Doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me that it is and was, but um,
So does that mean you would want to step away from the horror genre eventually, or do you think that would be the niche that you want to stay in?
eventually I could see myself losing that, I don't know, genre.
Do you think you're going to go for like a Daniel Steele romance saga or something?
Um, that's after this one. Even with this, like it's definitely got horror elements. I would say maybe not in the same way that my friend Nick did, and my next one plan kind of does too. And I think that my writing might always echo a little bit of horror, but I do have some ones planned that there's really not room for it. They're really dark dramas, even dark comedies. Dark, neo noir type stuff. And I think there would be a little bit of it, but probably not enough to call it. There's bits and pieces that kind of echo that, and I want to work on some perhaps sci-fi one day or fantasy, and I don't know if there will be horror elements worth mentioning. So right now, the immediate future, at least for Bride of Warren and my plan next year, there are horror elements in that one too. But after that, I don't know, and that's, I guess, kind of exciting too. It's good to try new things.
Yeah, it's the only way to really challenge ourselves and try some new direction and see how it works and go from there. But I wanted to ask, obviously I found you on Instagram, and that's where I discovered you and your book and everything. Do you rely a lot on the author community within Instagram and the reader community, or anywhere else?
Yeah, I do. You can't completely rely on it. Being an indie author like me, who I tried some advertising services. They are a lot of money, and I'm constantly learning, and so I'm not completely disparaging them. I've had more success myself. And yeah, it's interesting because that kind of, I don't know if it was an accident, but it just dawned on me a few weeks before my release to open up a page, and then I'd watched some videos about hyping stuff up. It was like, open up Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. I won't ever get on Twitter. I refuse. For reasons I won't state that people could guess. I will have nothing to do with Twitter. Let's get that out of the way. A couple other platforms I'm just not as comfortable or not wanting to be on there really, and I waste too much time on my personal account, or was, prior to opening my artist account, and it was easier to learn, and I was able to connect with people quicker. It did take some time. I do wish I would have done it sooner, and that's some advice I would give to anybody releasing a novel. If you can do it a year, 6 months, do it. It may the worst possible scenario, you'll get 5, 10 pre-orders on your book, but that's 5 or 10 you never would have gotten, and I don't know if I did get any from Instagram. I got some in the days following, but I only opened my page maybe a week or two before my book came out. But now at this point, I know that I'll be able to stack them, and that's partly because I've established a fan base on there, and so yeah, it is really helpful. It takes a lot of time and effort, I think, to learn to utilize it in a way that's most effective and benefits you and doesn't zap you of all your energy. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's great, and it seems to be working for you, and hopefully it'll continue to work for you with Bride of Warren and future novels. But there was on My Friend Nick, there was a particular review. There's a couple of reviews that jumped out to me, but one in particular that compares you to Stephen King. And I was curious, would you compare yourself to any other author, and would it happen to be Stephen King?
Honestly, no. I try to avoid doing that. I guess, it's always going to come up, and because he is such like just everybody knows him, he's basically, everybody's got a Stephen King book in their house somewhere. Even people who don't read,
Yeah.
it's there somewhere, but and I think it's going to happen inevitably. I do think that our writing styles are entirely different. I am a huge King fan. He inspires me both. I don't know, his work inspires me, and he as a human being inspires me, and his advice on writing. But I do think that it's impossible for there not to be, I mean, there just is overlap, Truly, as an artist, I would hope for it to be less than more, I kind of want to do my own thing. Some other artists that have influenced me are Cormac McCarthy. He has influenced my style quite a bit. But, kind of same there. I haven't read as many of his books, but I do try and do my own thing. A lot of my books, though, are inspired somewhat by King's work, and so I don't think you can completely escape that. I certainly don't go around telling people that. I'm sure maybe that there are, and I'm not saying that's wrong. I just don't want to build my career off that. I want to be known as being me. And I mean, you read the book, and you said you had read Stephen King, and I feel like people who have read enough of, his work, not mine, because I'm just getting started, but could truly see the differences. With my story, I guess without, spoiling anything, my friend Nick takes place in the fictional state of Bonneville. So I wasn't able to use a lot of like the pop culture references that Stephen King does in his novels and whatnot. Yeah. And while that's limiting at times, it creates new opportunities, and those opportunities allow me to be my own author.
Obviously, that review comes off as nothing but a compliment, and that's great. When I read the review, my interpretation and my agreement with that review was that the character voice that you use isn't necessarily the same or even really very similar to Stephen King's, but it is as effective as Stephen King's, I would say, especially for a debut novel. I mean, that's where I think you did the most strong in your book, was executing character voice.
I'm honestly glad I haven't seen that a lot in my reviews, that it's been mentioned a few times, but I don't want that to be what people take from my book is it, truly, again, I spent that much time, and it's, like I said earlier, they're based on my experiences, many of them extraordinarily traumatic. And it kind of gives him credit in a way, where it's like, and I try to give him proper credit by stating that he does influence my work. And I do. I love reading his books when I get the time. Cujo is one of my favorite novels. Misery, The Shining. But I don't know. I feel like we are very different human beings who have lived different experiences, and I try to capture that in my work. And yeah, ultimately, I hope that isn't something that I don't know. I don't know. I hope that I'm able to develop my own. I hate, people always are trying to do that these days, develop their own brand and style. But I don't know. Just I find it charming. I don't necessarily find it accurate, I guess you could say.
Yeah, everyone says you got to make your own brand, but it's like, you're expected to do what? Make a whole new genre in itself, or I don't know. But yeah, I want to jump to a new subject, actually a rather simple one. What books do you read? You were already talking a bit about your favorites from Stephen King, but what else do you read?
Strangely, I read a lot of like history, anthropology, sometimes psychology books. I do read, fiction as well. I don't know. I'm kind of a nerd at heart. I grew up reading science books when I was a kid. I just fell in love with dinosaurs and nature and all that stuff. And I love learning about ancient cultures, ancient civilizations. So I'm always reading something on, someone somewhere. And lately I have picked up a few indies. Man, I was reading The Dark Tower recently. I kind of took a break. I do read mostly nonfiction now, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for authors and readers to be able to enjoy a little bit of both nonfiction and fiction. Not necessarily a long read of either if you don't really find yourself enjoying it, but it is important to be informed on history and the world, especially if you're going to write about it, and try to convince your reader that they are, in fact, suddenly in this time that maybe they never even existed in, or maybe they did and they would know. But, yeah, I mean, what does success look like to you as an author, artist, creator?
I would like to reach more readers one day. Going back to the King, Stephen King success would be awesome. I don't know. I try and pace myself and just take things one step at a time. I think it would be cool to eventually maybe sell a screenplay based on one of my books, or I've thought about getting picked up maybe, or switching to traditional publishing later on. I know that that can be difficult. I don't know. Ultimately, I think the biggest thing is just to reach more readers. I don't make really of man. I guess, I'll be honest. I don't make really any money right now off this, anything worth mentioning.
Yeah.
But getting to reach new readers and do stuff like this is you're I don't know, you're living the dream. Whether or not you're living like Stephen King, it's exciting, it's fun, and I said for so many years I was going to do this and I was going to do this, and now I'm doing it. And
I mean, that's a pretty successful start, because a lot of people just talk about how they want to do it and they never do.
yeah, and you just got to keep going and believe in yourself. And what's that saying that I'm not into sports, but it's obsession. It's an obsession that drives me, and never giving up. But yeah, I don't know. It's obsession and just not giving up and wanting to reach more readers, and I guess whatever comes of that, I look forward to, and I just hope people keep enjoying my books and looking forward to my work in progress, whatever I'm working on.
And of course, that work in progress being Bride of Warren, you're targeting October 30th, correct?
Yeah, that's about my target is October 30th. I hope to be able to fulfill that, but that is my goal.
And for My Friend Nick, you had pre-orders, right?
Yeah, I did. I do wish that I would have had drawn that out by at least a month, maybe even two. But I think you're going to make mistakes and hopefully learn from them. But yeah, I will have pre-orders up hopefully a month before.
Oh, great. So pre-orders for Bride of Warren. And after Bride of Warren, when you've all said and done, released it, are you going to be taking a break, or are you going to jump right into the next project?
Kind of what I was going along with saying, making a schedule. I hope to, for the next year, do what I did with next couple of years, do with what I did with My Friend Nick, and at that time release it and do take a break around the holidays for a few months and figure out what I want to do. And I started writing this one back in January, so it wasn't honestly that long of a break, but it was substantial, and it was worth it because I don't know, it's a lot of work, and it gives me time to think. I originally was going to work on again a sci-fi horror this year, and I just started to get my reviews back, and I thought, I want to tell another story in this universe, and I kind of had one in the back of my mind, and I just went for it.
What you just said, I don't know if it's a spoiler, and maybe we don't even need to get into it, but if Bride of Warren happened to be a part of the same universe as My Friend Nick, I know personally for myself that anytime I get into like an author and really digging through their work, the connected universe between stories that don't really relate has always enthralled me. I've always loved that.
All of these stories I try to make believable, as My Friend Nick was, as much as I can, and I don't know, like I said, it fit right in, and I was able to connect some little things, and I think I will be able to in the future without saying too much, and people will be able to look at that and feel a sense of reward, I guess, hopefully feel like they're unveiling more of this universe, one more tiny piece of this I don't know, I guess dark American Western, I don't know, kind of wasteland.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm excited for you, and I'm excited to finally get into that new novel when it comes out. Is there anything you want to let people know, or any shout outs, or you want to let people know where they can find you?
I'll shout out to you guys for supporting me since pretty much the release. I appreciate being on here. I am at, sometimes I have to look it up, is that terrible? jhood.author at Instagram. Man, I feel bad. I should have put some more people on my list. My family has been extraordinarily supportive. My wife is the biggest supporter of my writing, and I think, I don't know, she keeps me going. I will say that without her support too, I don't know if I wouldn't have thrown in the towel by now. But um, she is she's she's the fiction reader. She reads, 5, 6 books like a week. It's crazy, man. She's one of those people. She'll read a book. She'll get a book and then read it that day.
I've never been very good at doing that. I wish I could do that all the time.
She's an English major, and so, she helps me to stay motivated, and we talk about different things. If I have a question, I can come to her, and she can find the answers. She can always find the answers. Sometimes they take a while, but I don't know. She's able to help me.
She sounds like a great person to be able to lean on.
Yeah, and I think those people don't get enough credit sometimes too. I think that it people just see the artist, but it's like without her, without my family, even my kids, they keep me grounded. They keep me in a good place, and my supporters, you guys, people who have bought the book, that has been the most truly, in some ways, I felt more of a reward for this even than I did in some ways, after college and after I got certain jobs, and this has just been the most rewarding thing ever. It's something that, like you said, so many people want to do, but not enough people. I don't know. I don't know if they give up or they feel like they can't do it. But the feedback I've gotten from my readers every single day, even if it's just one little thing. I read a review today. I've got 4, 5, 6 international reviews now, which is really cool. And I read one today, and it just made my whole day. It was really short. The other day I was looking at it and I was like, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. I don't know, this word shouldn't be here. And to hear that just reminds me that I'm still human. I'm doing my best, and that people are recognize my accomplishments and etc.
Yeah, and I think that's a great note for people to walk away with as readers, to make sure that you're leaving a review for those indie authors, especially any author, but the indie ones really need that support. It can be challenging, and I haven't personally experienced it, but I know putting yourself out there like that is very challenging. It's you feel vulnerable for sure, and getting that feedback is necessary to keep you going and motivated. And I'm hoping that people do walk away from this podcast, this episode, and actually grab your book and grab the book that's coming out, Bride of Warren, because I know my friend Nick was a worthy read, and I'm sure Bride of Warren will be too.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. Your review too was great. It is just was such a well written, well thought out review, and I appreciate. I appreciate every review, but it's always nice to sit down and really just read something that you can tell someone took their time on and really thought about.
And I always do this where I have to process what I've just consumed, be it a book, a movie, an album, whatever, before I can really review it. And I think I sat a good month after reading your book, just needing to think it over, even while reading some other things, and just, I guess, taking a step away. And that's kind of how I do a lot of that, is I need to take a step back and kind of let my brain chew on it.
I will never give people my real movie review of a movie, usually, until I've seen it twice. Not always, but that second time, I'm always, and it takes less time often to watch a movie usually than to read a book, so I'm able to do that. But I get a good idea, but sometimes I'll go back and I like it more. Sometimes I go back. Sometimes I saw Blade Runner 2049 a couple years ago, and I really liked it. I didn't love it, and then I watched it again, and I absolutely loved it. And I love that movie. I struggled with the ending the first time, and then I watched it again, and I was like, no, that's perfect. It's not what I wanted, and it's I don't know, it's hard. It's tragic, but it was a great movie.
Yeah, I think you recommended that to me like not long ago, and I do need to watch that. Sounds like a good movie, and I just got to find out where it's streaming. But yeah, do you want to maybe let people know where they can grab your book? I don't think we've even talked about that yet.
My book is available on Amazon. It's $10, $9.99 for the paperback, and $3 for the ebook. It is actually $1 right now, and as I'm sure as you saw, I am donating my proceeds this month towards the Black Lives Matter movement.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's that is important to me, and I think it's important to most people in this country, and
Absolutely.
sadly not all of them, but we're trying to, I don't know, hopefully it'll make a difference, and it will be able to provide resources for those who need them right now, and for that organization that distributes them.
Just stepping in for a second to let you guys know that this interview took place in July. That donation run actually has ended, but of course you can still find his book in the places he's mentioned.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I had a great time.
Me too, and I'm excited for you and the novel, and we'll be keeping an eye out for those updates.
All right, well, thank you so much, Cody. You have a good night, and everyone, you guys take care, your family, and
you as well, and have a good night. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there.
I enjoyed chatting with Joseph Hood as much as I enjoyed reading his work. I recommend you go out and grab My Friend Nick so you can read it before the release of Bride of Warren, which, again, is set for October 30th. So just in time for the spookiest and my favorite time of the year. I look forward to talking with Joseph again as he adds more titles to his name. Next time on None the Lesser, we will be talking about music and then some. Mexico City, a place known for many things, but funk might not be the genre that comes to mind when you hear its name. A duo resident to the city's suburbs is making a sound wholly new to the Mexican capital, and they go by the name Shiro Schwarz. We talk about their ventures in techno, music for meditation, and even get into philosophy a little with some positive outlook on life. That comes out on October 5th, so be ready for that and more from None the Lesser. Again, this is Cody Buchanan. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.